Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive tech millionaire docks his sleek new boat on his own lake, he doesn't expect a war with the HOA next door. But when a power-hungry president declares his private shoreline a visual violation, the real battle for ownership and pride begins. My name is Trevor Drake. I'm 41, semi-retired after selling a tech company, and I live in a modest house nestled on a hill overlooking Silverstone Lake. It's not some gated mansion or glass-paneled showplace. It's a two-story cedar home with a wraparound deck and a dock that stretches out into the water like a welcome mat. What makes it special isn't the architecture or the location. It's the fact that I own the entire lake, not a slice, not a shared waterfront, the whole thing. I inherited Silverstone Lake and the land surrounding it from my grandfather, a man who believed deeply in privacy, patience, and well-documented property lines. He bought the lake outright in the 70s when the area was mostly wilderness and fishermen. Over the years, developers gobbled up land nearby and created neat little housing communities with picket fences, trimmed lawns, and associations full of bylaws. One such place is Willow Bay, a neighborhood tucked along the southern edge of the lake. Their homes have scenic views, and their residents enjoy a strip of sandy beach right on the water's edge. But here's the twist. They don't own it. That southern beach is part of my property. Always has been. Willow Bay's Homeowners Association rents it from me. Well, technically, from an old law firm that handles my real estate holdings. The lease is tight, clean, and renewable every 5 years. It doesn't mention my name directly, only that the property belongs to a private landowner. I've always liked that layer of anonymity. It keeps things civil. People tend to behave better when they don't know who's watching. Life out here is peaceful. I wake up to loons calling across the water, sip coffee on the deck, and take my boat out for quiet early morning rows. I maintain the shoreline myself, keep the dock in good shape, and I let the HOA do their thing. Host cookouts, organize community swim days, whatever makes them happy. As long as they follow the rules of the lease, I stay out of their business. That changed the day I bought a new boat. A sleek blue and white beauty with just enough horsepower to pull a wakeboarder and just enough shine to make her a centerpiece. I docked it at my pier right at the edge of my property, a few hundred feet from the Willow Bay Community Beach. I didn't think twice about it. I wasn't doing anything unusual, just enjoying my own lake. What could go wrong? 2 days after I launched the boat, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox, marked with the embossed seal of Willow Bay HOA. Curious, more than concerned, I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, sipping coffee and watching the lake shimmer through the glass. The tone of the letter was formal, clipped, and thoroughly self-important. It began with, "Dear Mr. Drake, it has come to our attention that a private watercraft has been docked on the shoreline adjacent to the Willow Bay Community Beach. Per community standards and aesthetic guidelines, Article 6, Section B, no private equipment may obstruct or detract from the visual consistency of shared spaces." They were talking about my dock, my shoreline. The letter went on to kindly request that I remove the vessel within 5 business days or face appropriate fines and enforcement measures as determined by the Willow Bay Board of Compliance. I laughed out loud. Not bitterly, honestly, it was funny. I folded the letter neatly, set it on my desk, and leaned back in my chair, imagining the board meeting where this had been discussed. I could see it now. Meredith Foster, the president of the HOA, sitting at the head of the table with her signature stack of printed bylaws, passing judgment over my boat like it was an oil spill. The same HOA that held barbecues, volleyball tournaments, and kids' swim lessons on a beach they rented from an unnamed landowner had decided that my boat violated their visual harmony. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't respond. Not with a letter. Not with a call. Instead, I went down to the dock the next morning and changed the sign. The one I'd always had there, private property, no mooring, in faded red letters, was replaced with something more direct, property of TD. Drake Beach tenant, Willow Bay HOA lease violation will result in revocation of access. It wasn't aggressive, just factual, unmistakable. Later that afternoon, while I was tending to the garden on the lakeside slope, I saw a silver SUV pull up to the Willow Bay lot. Out stepped Meredith herself. I knew her by reputation, late 50s, always dressed like she was about to file a complaint somewhere and wielding a clipboard like it was a weapon of war. She marched across the sand, eyes locked on my sign like it had personally insulted her. She didn't look at me at first. She marched right up to the sign, read it, and turned on her heel like a general inspecting the enemy's fortification. Then she spotted me. I didn't say a word, just gave a polite nod and went back to trimming the lavender. "Excuse me," she called out, storming toward my fence line with papers fluttering in hand. "You can't just put that sign here. This is a shared lakefront." I looked up slowly and smiled. "No," I said. "It's not." She stopped cold. You could almost hear the mental gears grinding to a halt behind her squinting eyes. "What do you mean it's not?" she snapped, clutching her packet of bylaws like a legal sword. "That beach is part of the Willow Bay community. It's been used by our residents for years." I stood up, dusted off my hands, and calmly walked toward the edge of my dock, where the new sign gleamed in the afternoon sun. "That may be true," I said, "but used does not equal ownership." Meredith huffed. "We have a legal right to enforce aesthetic standards in shared spaces, and that includes any visible property within our sightlines. This boat," she waved at it like it had personally offended her, "is not permitted under HOA guidelines." I tilted my head slightly. "You're referring to property you don't own." Her lips pursed so tight they could have sliced paper. "I don't know who told you that nonsense, but I assure you, we have full jurisdiction over the community shoreline." "That's interesting," I replied, "because I believe I have something that might clear this up." I gestured for her to wait a moment and disappeared into my house, returning with a leather-bound folder. I opened it to a printed lease agreement, neatly marked and tabbed, and handed it to her. She took it reluctantly, eyes scanning the top lines. Leaseor, TD. Drake Lessee, Willow Bay Homeowners Association, term 5 years, parcel 200 meters of southern Silverstone shoreline. Note, lessee agrees to refrain from interfering with landowner activities within visual or physical proximity to leased space. Violation of this clause grants the lessor the right to terminate the lease with 14 days written notice. Meredith's face went pale as the realization sank in. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "You rent that beach from me," I said, keeping my tone even. "Well, not from me directly, from a legal entity that represents my holdings. I prefer to keep things clean and distant." She blinked slowly, still holding the papers, hands trembling just enough to notice. "I'm the private landowner your HOA sends rent checks to every quarter," I continued. "And according to that lease, I'm well within my rights to use my shoreline however I want, as long as I'm not disrupting your specific events. Which, I assure you, I am not." Meredith looked down at the lease again, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves. "You've been using my beach for years," I said, "hosting barbecues, scheduling swim lessons, issuing parking permits, all while blissfully unaware of who actually owns the ground beneath your lawn chairs." This can't be correct," she muttered, flipping pages now in a frantic, desperate shuffle. I gave a light shrug. "You can call your legal team. They'll confirm it." She stared at me for another long beat before thrusting the folder back into my hands like it had burned her. "We'll review this with our board," she snapped, before turning sharply on her heel and marching back across the sand toward her SUV. I watched her go, the corners of my mouth twitching upward. She didn't even glance at the boat this time. 3 days later, I received a politely worded email, surprisingly civil considering the sender. It was from the Willow Bay HOA secretary, inviting me to attend a special session of their monthly board meeting. The subject line, clarification and resolution regarding shoreline use. I almost didn't go. Part of me figured it would just be another circle of self-righteous residents puffing their feathers. But then again, the look on Meredith's face when she read the lease was too good not to see again in full daylight. So, I put on a clean flannel shirt, grabbed a fresh copy of the contract, and walked down to the community center at the bottom of the hill. The room was full when I arrived. Maybe 30 people, most of them familiar faces from my walks around the lake. Retirees in polos, parents with strollers, that one guy who always jogged shirtless no matter the season. They fell quiet when I entered, like someone had walked in with a gun instead of a folder of legal documents. Meredith was already seated at the head of the table, lips tight, fingers steepled. A pitcher of water and 3 printed agendas sat in front of her. She didn't acknowledge me. The vice president, a mild-mannered man named Glenn, gave me a nervous nod and gestured toward a chair. Meredith opened the meeting with a tone that was all business and no apology. "We've gathered today to address a recent issue regarding unauthorized private equipment appearing along our community beach," she began. As you all know, the HOA has clear standards for visual harmony and shoreline usage. She launched into a 5-minute monologue full of phrases like aesthetic disruption and encroaching structures. It was all technically accurate if you ignored the massive boat-shaped hole in her logic. The beach wasn't theirs. I waited until she finally paused for breath, then stood up and placed the lease document on the table in front of her, letting it land with a soft but deliberate thud. With all due respect, I said, I believe this discussion is missing a key piece of information. This beach and the shoreline around it are part of a parcel I inherited from my grandfather. You've been renting it from my representatives for over a decade. You may enforce your rules among yourselves, but not upon the landowner. There was a moment of stunned silence. A few people leaned forward. Glenn reached for the document and began reading. Meredith didn't touch it. Then someone from the back spoke up. Wait, are you saying you own the lake? Every acre of it, I said calmly, and the land surrounding it, including this beach. Another whisper rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, You've got to be kidding me. A younger woman near the door looked straight at Meredith. Is this true? Meredith's face had turned an impressive shade of red. This is highly irregular, she snapped. Our records are irrelevant, I cut in gently but firmly. You signed a lease with a clause that allows me to terminate it if the renter engages in hostile or obstructive behavior, like, say, threatening the landowner with fines over his own dock. I pulled out a printed notice and handed it to Glenn. Consider this formal notice. The lease is terminated effective June 1st. Gasps. Audible, genuine gasps. Glenn blinked, reading the notice, his hands visibly shaking. You're revoking our access to the beach? Correct, I said. All HOA use must cease by the end of the month. No more barbecues, no more swim lessons, no more volleyball tournaments. But, someone stammered, that's our summer. We've already paid for events, permits, everything. I suggest you speak with your board, I said, glancing pointedly at Meredith, and maybe ask why they picked a fight without checking the deed first. I left them in silence, walking out into the evening air, the sounds of disbelief and confusion buzzing behind me like insects. The boat bobbed gently at the dock as I returned home, waiting quietly like it knew it had just started a small war. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. Someone had recorded my statement at the HOA meeting. Of course they had, and posted it to the Willow Bay neighborhood group on Facebook. By noon, it had spilled into a larger community forum. The video was grainy, but my voice was clear as crystal. I own the lake. You've been renting the beach from me, and the lease is terminated. Within a day, a local journalist from the county paper reached out. They ran a piece titled, Man Behind the Lake, HOA Evicts Boat, Gets Evicted from Beach. It went viral, at least by small-town standards. Memes cropped up. One had a photo of a smug-looking boat captioned, HOA, remove it. Owner removes you. Even the local radio station had a laugh about it during their morning show. It was surreal, but not as surreal as the complete implosion of the HOA leadership. The residents were livid. Their summer plans had vanished in one meeting. Parents with kids in the swim club demanded explanations. Seniors who spent mornings lounging by the water started organizing an emergency vote of no confidence. And poor Glenn, he looked like a man stuck between a speeding train and a brick wall. Emails flew, angry comments filled inboxes, and through it all, Meredith, silent, until she wasn't. 3 days after the meeting, she sent a groveling letter to my legal team, begging to renegotiate the lease. It was polished, sure, but you could feel the desperation oozing through the paragraphs. It would be a shame, she wrote, for our vibrant community to suffer due to a simple misunderstanding. I declined, politely but firmly. That same night, a group of residents, most of whom had glared at me for years without knowing who I was, knocked on my door with a box of pastries and something like an apology. They didn't say much, just awkward smiles, a few mumbled "didn't realize," and one elderly gentleman who simply nodded and said, "Well played." By week's end, Meredith Foster was officially removed as HOA president. The board issued a public statement admitting they'd mishandled communications with a private landowner and were exploring new terms under guidance from council. Translation, they wanted their beach back and were now ready to kiss the ring. I didn't answer. Not yet. I figured a little silence would make the lesson stick. Silence, as it turned out, didn't sit well with Meredith Foster. After her dramatic fall from grace, I assumed she'd retreat quietly into her colonial-style home and stew in the wreckage of her broken authority. But Meredith wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat, especially not a public one. Losing the presidency was bad enough, but being humiliated by a man she'd tried to fine into submission, that was unforgivable in her book. And instead of licking her wounds, she started scheming. It began with a trickle of nonsense, anonymous complaints to the county zoning board about unauthorized commercial activity on my property. A week later, the IRS received a tip alleging I was generating undeclared income from recreational rentals at the lake. Both complaints were swiftly dismissed. My paperwork was pristine, my taxes obsessive, but it made things clear. Meredith had gone from power-hungry to petty, and petty was just her warm-up act. Then came the flyers. They started appearing on the mailboxes in Willow Bay, low-resolution passive-aggressive bulletins warning about the dangers of privately held water resources and urging residents to demand municipal review. One flyer even claimed I planned to build a private marina with no community access, complete with some hilariously photoshopped render of my dock turned into a casino pier. It was so over the top I laughed, until someone egged my boat. That was the first real escalation. A few yokes, some splatter, nothing that couldn't be cleaned. But it didn't stop there. 2 days later, I found my dock ropes cut. The boat was fine, thankfully, tied off redundantly, habit from years on the water, but the intent was clear. Someone wanted damage. Someone wanted revenge. So I checked my cameras. I'd installed them years ago, motion activated, all linked to my phone. And when I reviewed the footage, there she was, Meredith herself, wearing a hoodie like she was some suburban saboteur, creeping along the beach at night with a flashlight and a pair of shears. That alone was bad enough, but it got worse. The next clip was 2 nights later. Meredith, this time with a younger man, maybe her nephew or some poor HOA loyalist, carried a black garbage bag across the sand. They crouched near the end of my pier, lit a wad of paper on fire and stuffed it into a metal trash bin beneath my dockside bench. The flames flared briefly, flickered out, and smoked. Not quite arson, not yet, but damn close. I downloaded everything, made backup copies, then called the sheriff's office. I explained what had been happening, quietly, calmly, and with documentation. The deputy who arrived the next day was visibly annoyed. Not at me, but at the whole absurdity of the situation. All this over a boat, he asked, flipping through the printed screenshots. No, I said. All this because she lost. He nodded. We'll take it from here. Later that evening, they picked Meredith up from her home. According to a neighbor, she didn't even resist, just tried to lecture the officers on property law all the way to the cruiser. The following morning, the headlines practically wrote themselves. Former HOA president arrested for attempted vandalism at Silverstone Lake. Local news stations had a field day. The same people who had barely noticed our sleepy little shoreline were suddenly buzzing about arson charges, surveillance footage, and a woman described as a once-respected community leader turned disgraced saboteur. Meredith's mugshot, mid-blink, lips pursed in what looked like a grimace, was everywhere. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly at least, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some sense of closure. For weeks, she had waged a low-grade war against me, fueled not by principle, but by pride. And now, her obsession had landed her exactly where recklessness always leads, behind bars. The police report listed charges of trespassing, attempted property damage, and conspiracy to commit vandalism. The trash fire hadn't caused structural harm, but the intent, paired with footage and her history of antagonism, made it more than enough for the district attorney to take seriously. They tacked on reckless endangerment just to seal the deal. And it didn't help that the kid she dragged along, 18 and panicked, confessed everything the moment cuffs hit his wrists. The HOA, now desperate to salvage what was left of its reputation, issued a formal statement condemning Meredith's actions. These behaviors do not reflect the values of our community, they wrote. We remain committed to transparency, respect, and lawful cooperation with all local property owners. Translation: please, dear God, don't revoke the beach again. At a hastily called community meeting, a motion was passed to bar Meredith Foster from holding any position within the HOA indefinitely. A few residents asked if she could be prohibited from even attending events. Someone else asked half-jokingly if we could install a "No Merediths Allowed" sign near the volleyball net. Meanwhile, my lawyer filed for a no-contact order, which the court granted with zero pushback. Meredith wasn't allowed within 500 feet of my property, the shoreline, or any structure associated with my holdings. And just like that, the woman who had tried to bully me off my own lake was now legally banned from even looking at it. Funny how quickly tides turn. Summer rolled in soft and slow, the way it always did at Silverstone Lake. Early morning fog giving way to glassy water, birdsong echoing through the pines, and the hum of life returning after a strange and stormy spring. The dock was quiet again, save for the gentle creak of mooring lines and the occasional splash of fish below. Only now, instead of one boat bobbing at my pier, there were three. I'd added a vintage wooden runabout and a bright red canoe to join the original blue and white beauty. Not out of spite, though I won't lie, it made a statement, but because I could. And because nothing says lesson learned like tripling down. The beach remained empty for a while. The volleyball net came down. The HOA event signs vanished. No kids' swim classes, no weekend cookouts, just sand and silence. I kept the area clean out of habit, and, I suppose, a quiet respect for the land itself. It was never about revenge for me. It was about being left alone, and reminding people where lines are drawn and who draws them. Eventually, the HOA came knocking again, this time humbler, more careful. They submitted a formal proposal to reinstate the lease, drafted by actual lawyers and reviewed by my own team. The terms, well, they'd changed. The new agreement locked in a 10-year term at triple the original rate. It included an annual maintenance fee, paid to me directly. It required the HOA to install clear signage around the beach perimeter reading, "Private property, shoreline leased with permission. Please respect the landowner." And, most importantly, no more surprise letters, fines, or visual standards imposed by committees. All HOA correspondence touching lake matters now passed through my office first. I signed it. Not because I needed the money, but because I'd won. And part of winning is showing that you're not unreasonable. You just don't tolerate nonsense. The beach slowly came back to life. Cautiously at first. Quiet yoga classes at dawn, small groups with coolers and folding chairs. They waved now. All of them. Even the ones who used to avoid eye contact. Some still whispered when I passed by. I didn't mind. I'd rather be the story than the footnote. One morning, a new sign appeared beside the dock. Not mine. It was a gift from a neighbor I barely knew. Carved wood, burned lettering, mounted neatly between two polished posts. It read, "Respect the lake. Respect the owner. Want to make rules? Buy your own." I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, when I sit out by the water with a cup of coffee and the sun easing its way over the trees, I look at that shoreline, not with pride or power, but with peace. I know what it took to reclaim it. I know what it's worth. And I know every story that Ripple carries. Some lakes have legends. This one has me.